Hello everyone and welcome back to our Colossians podcast/video series. I hope you've been enjoying the lovely sunny weather, although as I record this now, it is quite cloudy. With the lockdowns, you may have been getting into gardening. I've done a bit of gardening, but I've struggled as I've quite a few weeds in my garden. They are a nightmare as you have to dig really deep and pull really hard to get them out because they have such strong roots. Much as weeds aren't great, they do help us think about the idea of being rooted, as we see in verse 7 of our passage today. We're looking at Colossians chapter 2 verses 6 to 15. So far we've seen how Paul has explained how awesome Jesus is, and he's encouraged the Colossians to persevere in Christ. Paul now turns towards the cultural pressures that the Colossians are facing. Paul starts in verse 6, reminding the Colossians that they have received Jesus as their Lord. They have made a commitment to following him. Paul follows this with a command for the Colossians to live for Christ, or more literally, walk in Christ. You see, in Paul's time, disciples learned from their teachers by walking with them. Think of Jesus and his disciples. So, with the Colossians, and indeed us, we need to walk with Jesus as we spend time in his word and follow his teaching. This is linked to the root in verse 7, as we are strengthened in Christ to withstand the struggles and temptations that lead us away from him. The Colossians are to be strengthened in the faith they have been taught, that is the gospel, which will be characterized by their thankfulness. As we reflect on how awesome Jesus is, as we've seen so far in this letter, we can be overflowing with thankfulness for the grace he has freely given us. In verse 8, we learn what the two major cultural pressures are that the Colossians are facing. Paul commands the Colossians not to be led astray by hollow and deceptive philosophy. He is probably referring to the pagan gods they had grown up worshipping. The Colossians lived in a Roman culture which had many gods. The second cultural pressure is hinted here in these verses, but becomes a lot clearer in next week's passage. It is Judaism, or more specifically, dependent on traditions of the Jewish law. Because Christianity originated from Judaism, there was an issue in the church as to whether Christians, specifically Gentile Christians, needed to follow certain aspects of the law, like being circumcised, which was a Jewish tradition. You can read more about the issue of particular circumcision in the book of Galatians. Paul doesn't want the Colossians to be led astray by these things. His response to these pressures is to summarize what he has said earlier about Christ being fully God. He adds that as the fullness of God dwells in Christ, so as the Colossians are in Christ, they have his fullness in them. There is nothing else they need to do, no extra laws or rules they have to follow to receive Christ. In verse 11, Paul outlines that the Colossians were circumcised spiritually by Christ. It means they don't need a bodily circumcision, as Christ has already done what is needed to save the Colossians from being ruled by their sinful selves, also sometimes referred to as the flesh. Verse 12 seems odd, as we've not been physically buried with Christ, but it's a picture of our union with Christ. Where Christ has gone, so we go. Just as Christ was raised from the dead, so we will be. Paul ends this section in verses 13 and 14 with a summary of what Jesus has done. You may be wondering, why does Paul seem to keep repeating himself about what Jesus has done? Because he is driving home that Jesus has done all we need to be saved from sin. Verse 15 ends with a triumph, almost a military parade, of Jesus overcoming the powers of the world. Indeed, the pagan gods that the Colossians once knew. Christ has done all we need to be saved. We can add nothing. So don't let false teaching lead you astray. Keep rooted in Christ. Follow his teaching and know him in your walk of life. So I've got 3 questions for you to help you with your discussions today. Question 1, look at verses 6 and 7. How does Paul describe how we persevere in Christ? What does it look like for you to be rooted in Christ? Question 2, look at verse 8 and think of the modern day examples of things that can lead you astray. Finally, question 3, look at verses 9 to 15. What has Christ done for you? How does this give you confidence in walking with Christ? The questions are in the description below this video, but they'll also be on a slide after I finish talking. Well, thank you for joining with me today. We're going to be taking a break next week as our church prepares for a guest event that you may have heard about. It's on anxiety. It's on Tuesday the 29th of June at 7:30 p.m. Do go to our website to find out more details about that. Have a nice day and God bless.